guys, so for this video I want to trim the foot to our jar. I'm just going to take the lid off and turn it over. The first thing I want to talk about is just actually referring back to the throwing video when I was talking about undercutting your pot. So if when you're doing your undercutting, if you practice undercutting a little bit and you learn to run that tool kind of from the good part here, right, where we have some volume, and then down below and just kind of follow that down very carefully so that the kind of circle that you make is on center with the rest of the pot, it'll make trimming a little bit easier for you. So I'm just going to turn this over and just use my concentric rings on the wheel head to see if I can get this centered like this. And let's just say that I had some trouble centering that, like using the concentric rings. Okay, so we'll go back to our other method of using the needle tool. So we can use the needle tool just by running the needle tool along the kind of like maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch down from where the edge of the foot is here, right? We'll be trimming this area away, so it won't really be a problem. So I'm just gonna let the pot come around and get scratched by the needle tool. So I'm only able to touch the pot if I hold my needle tools in a stationary way at the widest point, or at the most eccentric part of the orbit of the pot and on the wheel. So what I need to do is just take that kind of like the middle of that scratch mark here, right here and here. This defines the area that is furthest out from the circle. So this is the most eccentric part of the pot's orbit. So if I just divide this in half, that's the direction I need to push. Right, so I'm going to do this in reverse for you guys. So you can see now that's quite a bit more on center, right? Because I pushed it from the most eccentric part of the circle closer and closer to being in the middle of the wheel. Or for like the center of the pot to being in the center of the potter's wheel. So now we're very, very close. So you can just follow that process, or do that process one more time and get it like lined up perfectly. Just erase the marks that you've made and start again, and you'll get it closer and closer that way. I'll also talk about tap centering because I feel that it's useful for this. So the way that that works, when you have a volume resting above a narrow cylinder, you have to tap low on the pot, otherwise you can knock it over. So remember how I was talking about the most eccentric part of the pot's orbit, right? So like if I hold my hand still, that's where it's coming closest to my fingers. So I have to basically wait until that point, but I have to stay back far enough so that I'm able to just move forward and tap the pot, rather than following the pot along, moving back, and then moving forward. If I do that, the area I want to tap has already gone by. So I have to kind of watch this like gap, right? The gap's going to be like wide, small, wide, tap. That's the idea. So it's going to go wide, small, wide, tap. And then it goes right onto center. Okay, so just from this perspective, I want to explain one more time. So if you look at the rim of the pot here, the rim of the foot, and the tool, you can see how that gap kind of opens up and closes, and opens and closes like this. So the point where you want to tap it is when it's at its closest point in its rotation. So you have to kind of like start back from the pot and just watch the gap between the pot and your fingers, right? So you can see the pot get close and then move away, and close and then move away. And you have to kind of get used to tapping it when it's at its closest point. So now that we have our pot centered, what we need to do is key it down to the wheel head. So I just need to dampen the wheel head with a sponge, just a little bit, just to help the clay stick. And then I need to apply a fair amount of downward pressure with my hand while pushing our little key or little piece of coil into the against the bat, so that it pushes up against the pot to hold it in place. Don't skimp on the clay that you use for the keys. You need plenty. So this is like a 3/4 inch diameter piece of coil, more or less. There we go. Okay, so first step, we're going to just remove a little bit of extra material here using our little triangle trimming tool. So in order to do this, I need to bridge across my body, right? So I'm going to touch the pot in the center, plant my elbow or tuck it in tight to my side, and plant my right elbow like this. So this hand position is really stable, right? So I'm using my thumb to touch the tool, my first finger is guiding the tool, and my left hand is touching the foot. So I'm just going to kind of run up the side and remove a little bit extra material. Make sure everything's nice and cleaned up and centered, right? Like what I mean by centered is there's not any extra clay kind of like outside of the circle of the foot, right? So if you need to remove any kind of mess left over from the throwing, you know, anything like that you want to get rid of at this point. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just apply the tool to the foot area and just rotate the handle of the tool like this. And then we're going to end up with what will become a foot ring that's like more or less straight up and down. And we'll have a shelf here. It's extremely important to remove this shelf. This shelf is just like an artifact of the trimming process and is not something that's to be left behind as a part of the piece itself. So we need to have this vertical foot meet this convex shape. Okay, so what that means is we need to remove everything between this vertical foot and this convex shape. So I'm going to start down here by riding on the convex shape itself, or this volume here, and just remove everything that's between there and the foot. So I think I'm going to make my foot a little bit taller now, just by removing a little bit more clay, like this. And I'm actually going to begin to just undercut this shape slightly. What I mean by that is if my tool is perfectly vertical right now, I'm going to continue turning it so that the diameter where the foot meets the pot is smaller than the diameter at the edge of the foot. Now I'm going to again remove any artifact of that by allowing this curve to meet where the foot meets the volume. Okay, this is a really good time to switch over to a wider bladed tool to kind of clean up this volume here. So I'm going to use this tool and just work from kind of like the unaffected part all the way to the foot now. And I'm just turning the tool as I go. I think one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you here is to kind of like get down on the level of this pot and look at the line and just see if there are any flat spots, if there are any wide points, like what's happening. Is it continuous or not? That's really the question I think you want to ask yourself. And if it is, great. And if it's not, why not? Right? So like it's okay if it's not continuous, if that's intentional. If maybe you're trimming like a pattern, or maybe it's like banded, or maybe there's a million different things you can do here, but you should be in control of that. That's all I'm trying to say. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is the thickness here, right? So you're not going to run into anything unexpected if you followed the using the ribs on the interior and opened the piece to a curve and then used the rib to kind of reinforce that curve, right? Because the inside is curved, so the outside can also be curved. But what we need to know is how close we're getting to the inside of the wall. So what you can do is just take your thumb and press on the wall. And if you get like a little divot in the surface, you'll know that you have more material that you can remove. If the wall begins to flex under the pressure of your thumb, you'll know that you need to stop removing material. So I just did that, and you can see I've got extra clay there. You can see this little divot here. So there's plenty of extra material. So I can make the foot a little taller and make this curve a little, come in a little bit more. And this is the beauty of leaving a 1/2 inch here. When you leave a 1/2 inch in the center, as I talked about in the throwing video, you end up with something in the range of 3/4 inch here. And you don't have to keep it all if you don't want to, but if you have it there, then you're able to kind of make these kinds of adjustments. So I've just made the foot a little bit taller, and now I'm just going to kind of fix up the area where the foot meets the curve here. There we go. Okay, so I often get the question, how wide do I make the foot, right? So I think the answer to that is a little bit, like I don't like making rules about these kinds of things, but I think that the answer is like a good place to start might be a little bit narrower than the rim, right? If the foot's a little narrower than the rim, the pot is going to look light. If the foot is wider than the rim, the pot's going to look heavier. If you're looking for that kind of like heavy, sturdy, type of form, then that's great. You might want to try that. But for this type of piece, I'm going for a little bit narrower foot than the rim, and I've actually even made the foot slightly narrower than where the neck joins this shoulder here. So that's just my own sort of aesthetic. But okay, so I think we're just about ready there. I'm actually going to take it in just a tiny bit more. I think it's so important to pay careful attention to this area right here. This shape and this shape, how they come together, really can make or break your pieces. So I'd be very, very clear about what's going on here, right? Is this a geometric shape like we talked about? Is this a sphere? And if it is, at what point on the sphere does this cone or cylinder begin, right? That's important stuff. I'd maybe even do one of those drawings and really think that over. Okay, I think we're ready to remove the interior of the foot now. So what I need to do first to remove the interior of the foot is decide how wide the foot's going to be and then give myself a little extra space. So if I want my foot to be 3/8 inch thick, I'm going to go to like 1/2 inch, right? I'm going to go to like 1/2 inch and cut down. So always bridging, right? I've got my left arm tucked in tight, my thumb touching the tool, my right arm tucked in tight, and my first finger. So everything's like connected, right? All the way across. And I'm even riding my first finger on the foot like this. So everything's really stable. And I'm just gonna dig right down almost to the finished depth here. So we know we can go more than 1/4 inch here, right? Because this is a 1/2 inch deep, so we got plenty of room. Okay, so what I need to do now, since I've made this deep cut here, and I do this deep cut for a really good reason. So when you go to remove the interior of the foot ring, if you have this deep cut, you'll never cut through your foot, right? You'll never like be working out, removing material from the bottom of your pot, and then continue out through your foot ring and accidentally and cut away clay that you can't afford to lose, right? So I always recommend making this cut and then removing the inside. So you want to use the right hand edge of the tool, work your way from the center off to the right, and just remove all that material. Okay, again, it's important to know if we're getting close to our finished depth. So I'm going to push, and what I feel happening is there's plenty of clay. See that little dent right there? If you get a dent like that, if the clay is at a normal hardness for trimming, which is leather hard, you'll know that you can remove more because I've put enough pressure to dent the surface, but the bottom of the pot is not flexing, which means I can remove more material. Now what I'm going to do is clean up the inside edge of the foot. So I just take my trimming tool and kind of push it against the inside surface here and bring that diameter out to end up with a finished foot thickness in the range of 1/4 of an inch, or it could be a little bit more. The point where the foot meets the pot, all the way down in here, is lower than the center point of the pot because the interior of the pot is a curve, and the wall thickness will kind of mirror that, right? The outer edge here. So you can make the outer area of the inside of the foot deeper than the center of the foot, and I'm going to do that now. If the inside of the pot is a curve, then the outside of the pot can also be a curve. What that means is this volume can continue right through this foot ring all the way to the center point of the piece. Alright, so I like to make a circle on the inside here, and that's where I'll sign the piece. So I like to just use my wide-bladed trimming tool to dig down and then just dig the corner in a little bit. And that will give me a ring on the inside, which I think just adds like a little structure or a little architecture to the foot. And you can even make more than one ring in there. You can do lots of fun stuff in there. Okay, so next step is we have a flat bottom of the foot right now, which is just like left over from when the pot was flat on the bottom. So we're going to bevel the bottom of the foot now. And what beveling means is we're going to remove the edges, right? Like if the foot and the wall of the bottom of the foot and the wall of the foot meet at 90 degrees, we're going to make that 45. So we're going to just remove that side. And then this side, and then we're going to run the tool over that whole surface to end up with a rounded bottom. And the reason we do that is because it reduces the area of contact of the pot to the kiln shelf and the table, and it'll prevent it from rocking and scratching things, and it's easier to polish, and there's lots of good reasons to do it. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of add a little trimming detail down here now, which will mimic or kind of repeat what I did where the finial met the lid, right? So if you look at the lid here, I've got this nice little kind of pointy disc, right? Like a little, I don't know, a little UFO. It's a little shape right there. And I'm going to repeat that little shape at the foot of the pot. So the pot is almost bracketed by these shapes. So I think one thing that can sort of bring some continuity to your work is repeated elements within a form and then across like a series of forms, right? So this idea of this little line kind of accenting or bracketing or delineating the start or finish of a particular shape in the form. Like here it sort of shows where the foot starts, here it sort of shows where the finial starts, here it shows where the lid ends, here it shows where the volume meets this kind of cylindrical shape. Things like that really start to make the work sing. It really brings like some continuity to the work. So whatever that is for you, just think about that. Think about repeating those particular places in your work. So I'm just gonna wet the surface here with a damp sponge. And then I'm gonna take, you can use either a rubber rib or a sheet metal rib for this. If you have a grogged clay, you might want to try a sheet metal rib. This is a porcelain, so it doesn't really have a lot of grog, so I'm just going to use a rubber rib. And you just fit you build up a little slip using the sponge, and then just apply a little pressure, and it'll just smooth everything out beautifully. And especially on the bottom of the foot. So I do that with the rib, and then I just use my finger to make sure it's like nice and smooth there. Okay, let's pull our keys off. Okay guys, so here's our finished jar. A couple things I'd like to point out just briefly. So you can see that the jar is kind of composed of cones and curves, right? So like this is a curve, and the top of the finial is a curve. The volume is a curve. And then this underside here, the finial, is like a V or a flared form. So is this part of the pot right here, right? This is like a cylinder or a partial cone shape, an inverted cone shape. It's an upside down cone right here, just a part of it. The foot is actually a cone shape as well, moving in the other direction. So we have like a few repeated elements throughout the form, right? A couple of which is like why it looks kind of finished, and why the which is why it looks so good. Okay, so I just want to go back to talking about our like geometric shapes here briefly, now that the piece is finished. So here we have our volume, right? This is like our ovoid shape. The widest point of the ovoid shape is roughly in the center. And here we have the cone, which is, or cylinder, which is a slightly conical cylinder. And here we have a steep cone at the top, right? So you can see we have like a partial volume and a partial volume. And then we have like a cone shape, a cone shape, a cone shape. So this pot is all made of like the same two parts over and over again. Even at the top of the finial, which I didn't really include in the drawing originally, that's a partial volume, which relates to this volume, which relates to this volume. So, and then the underside of the finial is like a cone shape or like a V shape, as is this, as is the foot. So those are some really important like things that tie the pot together to itself, right? Another thing to think about is the way that the foot is kind of like coming in to meet that volume. That's like the opposite direction. So you can see it really pushes the pot up off the surface that it's sitting on visually. It's sort of like a much more dynamic, or it's a very dynamic type of a foot to trim, right? Because the foot is moving in the opposite direction of the volume. I think those are all the things I wanted to mention. So anyway, that came out good. I hope you guys enjoyed that video on making jars. There's lots to work on with jars. Jars are one of my favorite things to make because they're complicated and architectural and really interesting, and they're a really good way to kind of get ready for teapots and coffee pots and all those really exciting things. So I hope you guys enjoyed that series. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.